We're in conversation this evening with Vincent Gallo, star, director, writer, and composer for the new film Buffalo 66. Vincent, welcome to Celluloid Dreams tonight.
Thank you very much.
Vincent, Buffalo 66 is the story of a troubled young guy whom you play in the movie, Billy Brown, saddled with unloving parents, who's searching for love and who winds up finding it not where he expected or necessarily wanted it. A couple questions to just start this going here. What was the genesis of this story, and was this a story creatively that was kind of begging to be written?
There always was probably a tiny bit of vindictive nature in me from childhood. And as I went through different experiences that I felt were less than appropriate, I would, somewhere in the back of my mind, think that someday, as a public figure, if I demanded myself to become a public figure, I could turn it around somehow and represent this horror publicly for all the world to see. The original delusion that I had was that I was going to become a superstar at something, go on the Johnny Carson show and say something nasty to my mother and father. Was that the motivation to write the script? No. The conception of the script came as a sarcastic joke at the Cannes Film Festival years ago, where I pitched a story about a guy who has to pee for the first 15 minutes of the film. And I engaged a group of creepy producers and sleazy film creeps at Cannes at the Hotel de Cap with this humorous credit sequence, as I called it then. Another thing happened once I was driving across the country on one of my many road trips, and I have a gazillion cassettes that I've made over the years. I have 15,000 albums, so I keep making these cassettes for road films. Somewhere on one of the cassettes, at the very tail end of it, I didn't cover up a piece of music that had been recorded by me 20 years before. And it was when I recorded my father singing Fools Rush In my bedroom in Buffalo, New York. And I was a bit startled by just how good he was. One always imagines things when they're young, how big they are, how fantastic they are. But as an adult, one can sometimes be disappointed. I, however, when I listened to this cassette, was not disappointed. I was shocked by how good my father actually sang. So that was another premise for a scene in a film, a scene where the father sings incredibly and he is, at the end of the song, back again, this miserable, horrible person that he is, So just this juxtaposition of extreme sensitive talent and extreme rage and horror. And the concept of the love story is something that I believe in very strongly in my political and philosophical point of view, which is that adults are not victims and adults need to choose relationships that are appropriate for them, choose to act out on their negative feelings, their resentments, their angers in the most productive ways possible, to kind of act contrary to the routine that they've been repeating for years and years. And so the story of Billy Brown's commitment to change his life there is a very deep and powerful concept to me, and something that I'm rigorously identifying in all my concepts of how human beings behave.
So were your parents like Janet and Jimmy in the movie? I mean, you use them as sort of like a template for, because the parents in this film are really just whoo.
The Buffalo 66 script is a pure piece of fiction. However, the role played by Ben and Angelica, the roles of my mother and father, are very much identical to my mother and father. I mean, if you were a relative or a friend of the family, you would say that I had done a brilliant job at portraying a realistic view of my mother and father. However, people are a bit more complicated in real life and over a longer period of time than they can be presented in a short film. My father and mother are actually much more exaggerated than the characters in the film. My mother's a bigger football fanatic. My father's much more raging and violent than in the film. But if one puts them into the context of their generation, their upbringing, their way of living, they did the best they can. They are very funny, amusing, charismatic, talented people. My father's one of the most talented men I've ever met in my life, and my mother is certainly a devoted fanatic, which is always an attractive quality to me. At this point in my life as an adult, they are not such toxic characters in my life, so the characters in the film are a little more destructive to the character of Billy Brown, well, a lot more than they are to me in my life. But the truth is, growing up, that is very much the mother and father that I had to grow up with. The fortunate thing is I didn't become exactly like Billy Brown. I became nothing like Billy Brown. I have my own extreme problems, but they're much different than Billy Brown.
Have your parents actually seen the film?
Yes, they said I premiered the world premiere of my film in Buffalo, and I invited my mother, father, 250 relatives, 250 friends of mine and the families, and every cute girl that I remembered from growing up in Buffalo.
To what extent do you feel that making Buffalo 66 helped you to come to terms with a lot of those unhappy experiences you went through growing up?
Making the film didn't do any of that. Writing the script was the catharsis. The real obsession that I have is not in bitter resentment against my mother and father. I'm much more obsessed with methodical aesthetic and my artistic sensibility and my point of view, socially and artistically. The real relief was not in being able to exorcise the demons of my mother and father. It was to once be able to control completely my aesthetic point of view, my sensibility, and my ideas conceptually about art and cinema. That was the relief. It's the first time in my life. I mean, I had a very successful career as a painter in the 80s, but somehow just engaging with an art dealer and an art gallery and the lack of control over the collectors, how the pieces were hung, et cetera, was already a major sacrifice. I never even felt good about the work, but it was the thing that I felt most in control of. In cinema, I've always felt unpleasant feelings completely. I've never felt that any performance I've done was either written better than I could have rewritten it or originated it, or I've never felt that the director had a point of view to capture the character or the performance in a way that I was comfortable with. So it's always been agony.